Welcome to Incredible Idaho. I'm Wayne Walker. Each year at this time, we do a special edition of our show featuring the season's best Incredible Idaho stories. Now, usually we build a show around a theme, but this year's selection defies a category. It's been a season rich with new adventures and intriguing people, a fascinating collection of what makes Idaho so incredible. Our show begins in the foothills that make up the Boise Front north of our capital city. Recently, wildlife biologists discovered that this area is one of the best places to observe migrating birds of prey. And that's great news if you're an avid bird watcher, but it's even more exciting for the scientists who study these mysterious creatures.
There's one being stooped by two other little ones, but I can't really tell what they are. Just have to move in a little bit closer.
Researchers speculate that the arid Snake River Plain acts as a natural barrier to birds of prey as they migrate south for the winter. They skirt the area by soaring along its edge, drifting over the foothills and following the ridgeline south. It's a remarkable occurrence that invites study because very little data has been gathered on the migration of these majestic birds.
It's an adult sharpshin. There he is.
Each day of the fall migration, volunteers armed with binoculars count and record every raptor, hawks, falcons, eagles, and other birds of prey that they see. Last fall, from September 1st to October 20th, they recorded 3,572 birds of prey passing through the area. This year, with a more concentrated effort, the count may exceed 4,500. Where are they coming from? Where do they go in the winter? What migration routes are they using? Are their numbers increasing or declining? Researchers are hoping to learn the answers to these questions by capturing some of the birds and marking them with leg bands.
Nice fall day.
Yeah. Wildlife biologists Kirk Bates and Bruce Hawk weren't expecting to be dealing with snow, frozen nets, and a frigid wind the first week of October. But then nothing's predictable in the wildlife business.
Okay. Start spreading that end out down there and we'll see how frozen it is.
The trap site is located at the crest of a peak in the foothills, right in the face of a bitter wind. It consists of a series of nets strung between poles that will capture a low-flying bird and 3 ground-level traps called bow nets.
Then as a raptor comes in, we use the pigeon to lure it into the center of the net, and then as the raptor actually comes down to grab the pigeon, we spring the net and catch the raptor.
The pigeon has 2 companions, a dove and a house sparrow. The smaller birds lure in smaller raptors like sharp-shinned hawks or kestrels. Each lure bird is laced into a leather jacket that serves to protect them from the raptors and also attaches them to a lure line. This allows the biologists to lift them in the air, displaying them temptingly to any passing hawks or eagles cruising nearby.
This is their little rock houses that we put for them at the site so that they can go in to avoid weather extremities. It's hot in the first part of the season, then it gets cold, as you can see right now, during the latter part of the season.
Finally, everything is set up and the biologists disappear inside the blind to settle down and wait.
Yeah, we're always on the constant lookout because birds, we only see probably half of the birds that really come into the station. The others blindside us, so we always have to present the pigeon about once every minute or two.
This is what the raptor sees when Kirk presents the pigeon. Last fall, 368 birds of prey were lured into the trap site by this setup and captured.
All right. What kind of goshawk? Wait. I got it. Okay. Okay.
That's a good way to start today.
Great. We can set the bow net and check the pigeon. Looks like a male due to its size. You can see how fast things happen. Again, we don't have any idea where these birds are coming from. That's what we hope to achieve with this project.
Goshawks are one of the larger birds of prey that migrate through the area. Like most raptor species, the male goshawk is generally smaller than the female.
We slide into this can, and we take some of the measurements in the can as well as its weight, but it also keeps the bird calm.
The main purpose of the trapping project is to ban the birds in hopes that they'll be recovered somewhere and the bands returned to the address inscribed inside. In this manner, researchers can get some idea where the birds travel.
8.9.
Various measurements are taken in order to record some baseline data on the birds, such as the goshawk's weight and the length of the talon or claw.
Millimeters for a tail measurement.
The project has caught the attention of a number of groups who have come on board with funding or in-kind contributions. The list reads like a page out of a natural resource guide. The Forest Service, the National Biological Service, the Idaho Department of Fish and Game, Bureau of Land Management, Boise State University, Boise's Golden Eagle chapter of the National Audubon Society, and to help sustain the volunteers of food credit at the Boise Co-op. Despite the long list of cooperators, the actual funding is limited, and the project is dependent on the generosity of volunteers.
Okay, the goshawk's finished being processed and we're ready to release him.
It's a handsome bird. The males have a wingspan up to 3.5 feet. As he matures, his plumage will turn from this brown to a beautiful silver. Kirk tosses the goshawk into the air, and the bird is gone.
Raptors are a good indicator of ecosystems and the health of those ecosystems. And if the top level predators in an ecosystem are doing well, then overall that's a good indicator that the system is healthy.
And that's when I realized...
The second capture of the day is another one of the larger raptor species.
This is great because we don't catch very many of these. It's an adult redtail.
The red-tailed hawk is equipped with talons large enough to carry off a ground squirrel or jackrabbit. Its diet is mainly small mammals. Red-tails are not as likely to be drawn in by the prey offered here.
Okay, our trap time was...
It was 14:37.
Okay.
Once again, measurements and weight are recorded and the red-tail is fitted with the all-important leg band. Before releasing her, Kirk spreads her wing, displaying how truly regal this creature is. Then, he sets her free. She flies away, soaring gracefully above the earth, riding the wind.
No, they're not real happy. They got pretty good canines. He's a little worn. We've got a male.
Last winter, guest host Jack Hemingway brought you a story about pine martens, a creature most of us have probably never seen in the wild. It is a member of the mustelid family, a little cousin to the wolverine and otter. But don't let its small stature fool you. What it may lack in size, it more than makes up for in attitude.
It's almost unbelievable that such a sweet-faced little animal could emit this savage sound. And it's about to intensify as Fish and Game reservist David Hawks prepares to do the unthinkable and reach into the pen to capture the creature.
Don't. Dad thought he was sick. Do is I like to grab and bite to the head or the tail, although they're a pretty durable animal. You generally won't hurt them, no matter where you pick them up. That's what I try for, right like that.
He's the size of a small house cat, a cat with a huge chip on his shoulder.
No, they're not real happy. They got pretty good canines. He's a little worn. We've got a male.
He's about to be a pioneer, in a sense, one of a small group of pine martens that will be released into the Caribou National Forest in the southeast corner of Idaho. He'll be joined by 6 of his fellow captives who have been temporarily held here in individual pens at David Hawks' mink farm.
I hog ring these like this because I don't want any chance of them getting out. And they're different from a mink in the way they use their paws, their front paws. They can use them almost like you'd think a monkey or a person would, because they can reach and pull and grab with their front paws, and a mink won't do that.
Historical records indicate that pine martens were prevalent in this corner of the state until the 1930s and 40s. They are easily trapped and probably disappeared from the area due to overharvest. Now, with the help of volunteers like David Hawks, the pine marten is returning to its historical habitat.
They say they're an indicator species. If the habitat's healthy, why, there'll be marten in there, and I hope that you know, we can get a decent population of marten. You know, whether or not they trap them later on down the road, why, that'd be nice if the population's that healthy, but even if they're not, why, you know, they're kind of a neat critter. You don't hardly ever see them. I've only ever seen one in my whole life in the wild. They're just kind of neat to have out there.
The final pioneer is no happier than the first captive. He receives ear tag number 45 and is unceremoniously stuffed into his wooden traveling case, still protesting violently. From here, it's an hour by truck, followed by a mile or so of snowmobile trail to the release site. The pine marten program was initiated by fish and game biologist Carl Anderson in cooperation with the Caribou National Forest.
So they used to be here, and I knew that they weren't now. And I just thought it would be kind of a rewarding and productive kind of a thing to return these animals to his habitat that they used to occupy.
Looky there.
Carl contracted with a trapper near Salmon to capture the pine martens in live traps. Small wire cages about the size of a large shoebox. So far, 42 martens have been captured near Salmon and then released in this general area over the last 2 winters.
I try to spread them out because they're, you know, naturally not real dense in population. They don't hang around together. They're solitary animals, so I try to spread them out a little bit, but we want them, you know, to have a chance of running into each other later on, if you know what I mean.
4 martens, 2 females and 2 males, will be left at this site in separate wire pens. The process is called a soft release, a sort of modified method of liberation that requires more attention on the part of the biologists, but seems to be worth the extra effort involved.
Well, the idea here is that we place them in these pens and hold them here for 3 or 4 days, and I'll come back every day, check on them and feed them, make sure they're okay. They found in other areas where they've done this with them, when they had radios on, that they could follow the animals, that this tends to encourage them to stay in this general area once they're released instead of taking off and traveling long distance.
While they're still in the pens, the pine martens will be fed meat from a road-killed deer. But their normal diet consists of small prey, mainly rodents and the occasional squirrel or rabbit. Carl will attempt to check their progress with the use of cameras like this one. It contains an infrared detector that snaps a photograph when a warm-blooded animal feeds on the nearby carcass. But why all this fuss over a creature most of us will never see?
It's because we're people, and we're concerned and interested in wildlife and nature in general, and it's just an opportunity to bring something back that has been removed or taken away, in this case, I believe, by the action of human beings back in the past.
It's a hate and love situation constantly. There's a certain phase where it goes through and you just want to go, yuck, I hope nobody walks in to see this, because it's such a mess.
From time to time, we've used paintings like this to illustrate stories about Idaho history, events and adventures that we can only read about, that took place long before the advent of videotape and even before the first primitive photographs. In our next story, Jack Hemingway introduces us to a man of vision who uses his gifts to capture those images never recorded.
Only in the imagination of an artist can we find the pictures to portray the history of the mountain man or the heritage of the bow hunter. a legacy that's figured so highly in the traditions of sportsmen today. In the course of searching for these historical portrayals, we found ourselves relying quite heavily on one artist in particular, and discovered that not only does he take great pride in accurately depicting Idaho's history, but his talents range far beyond.
I call myself a journalistic artist, trying to record some of the history. Maybe it's just painting a bird, but that bird may be gone someday. So, you know, all of this is all interrelated to my inner feelings of preservation, maintaining the environment, creating something that's beautiful people want to look at, maybe put in their homes, hopefully.
Or on their hunting licenses. Anyone who's purchased an Idaho archery, muzzleloader, or upland bird stamp is probably familiar with Ralph Harris's work. This past year, more than 32,000 upland bird stamps were sold to hunters and collectors, featuring Ralph's classic design of chukar partridges soaring above the spectacular Bruneau Canyon.
The stamps have been one of the major elements of my whole career. It's given me a lot of prestige, a lot of ability to interrelate to the government, Forest Service, the Fish and Game, a lot of other avenues that sort of plug in that one doesn't even anticipate. That's doing something for the environment as well as for the government, you know, Fish and Game Department, all of that. It ties in really nicely.
Royalties from the sale of prints go to both the artist and to support the upland game bird habitat. But the world of the wildlife artist can be a demanding one. Ralph believes emphatically that every element of his creations be portrayed accurately, from the animals themselves to the most minute details of the surrounding environment. Today, he's modifying this design in response to some suggestions from a Yellowstone grizzly bear biologist.
Like this particular guy right here, he's got to be made to look like a smaller, younger bear. So we're going to have to take some of the detail or definition out of the face, make it rounder, make it look a little long, softer.
According to the biologist, an adult male bear would not be found within such close proximity to a female with cubs. So Ralph erases a few years on the grizzly with some subtle sweeps of his brush, shortening the nose and blurring the angular face.
All of the paintings are like that, I have, especially when you get into wildlife. Everybody, especially biologists or people that are in the know, can nail down problems immediately. And if one's doing that, if you're accepting that discipline, you want to go into that area, you got to accept that somebody out there is going to say, this isn't right, the paws aren't right, the expression isn't right, the movement isn't right.
Here, Ralph is using the word discipline to describe a field of study. But he also uses the same word to characterize the lifestyle of a successful artist.
You have to be very dedicated, disciplined, very disciplined, self-disciplined, because you don't have a time schedule to punch in and punch out. That once the thought process happens, you start laying it out, then it becomes a competition almost, where you want to make it, you have an image back here the way you want it to look, and it never comes out like that. So it's constant fighting with the texture, the composition, the color, all that business.
Ralph uses acrylics, mixing the various shades and hues from a few primary colors on his palette. Even basic black becomes quite complex.
And then I can balance it to the warm or the cool side in the black. You can make it, see that's kind of a dark blue black, and then if I add a little bit of red here, I can turn it to the reddish scale, like that.
It seems somehow the artist sees our world through totally different eyes. Ralph explains that he breaks down every element in his compositions to rounded shapes, ellipses, circles, and cones. Each has a cool, shaded side opposite a warmer, lighter part. And when it comes to feathers and furs, the lifelike quality is the painstaking result of some very specific and delicate techniques.
I'll put down a very dark color underneath, and then I'll take that color and put the fur over the top of it because it has a tendency, if you just try to paint fur, it comes out very flat. And so then I will take that and maybe take a lighter color of it, or redden it a little bit. And then put that over the top, and it has a tendency to give it more volume, more shape to it.
The final touches depend on whether the fur is wet, in sunlight, or in shade. It's a slow, methodical process, and one that requires a tremendous amount of creativity, mixed with large measures of patience and precision.
It's a hate and love situation constantly. There's a certain phase where it goes through and you just want to go, yuck, I hope nobody walks in to see this, because it's such a mess. And you just pray that it comes together.
Obviously, it has come together over and over again for Ralph. This fourth-generation Idahoan grew up in the Wood River Valley. When he's not in his studio, he's either working as a professional ski instructor at Sun Valley or spending time in the outdoors with his camera, shooting the backgrounds featured in his paintings. His art portfolio is a reflection of his life. For years, Ralph Harris has been the artist designing the regular Pointers feature in Ski Magazine. And Ketchum's annual Wagon Days Festival, an homage to its mining past, has commissioned Ralph to design prints commemorating the festivities. In these disciplines, too, Ralph emphasizes accuracy. This design is based on photographs of downtown Ketchum before the fire of 1896. The buildings on the left side of the street were all lost in the fire, but regular visitors to Ketchum will see some familiar structures on the right.
The most recognizable building is the Comstock and Clark building, which was a bank. It later became the Pete Lane building. Pete Lane then developed a ski shop in Sun Valley right after Sun Valley was built. His family were early pioneers here.
In addition to the hundreds of hours that go into the actual painting of a composition, it is quite apparent from the detail in Ralph's designs that this artist spends an enormous amount of preliminary time researching his subject matter. The Native American aspects of his archery prints have been discussed in length with members of the Shoshone-Bannock tribes, from the detail in the weaponry to the markings on the Indian ponies. And the mountain man era depicted in Ralph's muzzleloader artwork is a result of trips to modern-day trapper rendezvous. This recently released 1995 design features Ralph's childhood friend in full mountain man attire posed against the spectacular Boulder Mountains. Each of Ralph's designs is a complete image, a moment frozen in time that begins in the recesses of the artist's imagination and magically becomes canvas and color. It's an agonizingly slow process, but one that's creating history, something that will last, something that moves the discriminating viewer.
That's when it really gets exciting. Somebody will walk up and they'll just stand there and look at it, come over here and look at that, and then they'll look at something else and they'll stand back, and then they'll call their friends over, hey, come look at this is really something, you know, look at the coloring. Then that's when it gets exciting.
It's like, I think of Aldo Leopold's old line about you can do without golf, but who could live without goose music?
Our following story is about another wildlife artist, one who portrays images with a camera instead of a canvas. As any editor will tell you, wildlife photography is a very competitive business, and those who are talented enough to make a living at it must possess enormous amounts of patience, persistence, and discipline. A healthy knowledge of wild animals and their habits helps a lot too.
Sort of called a floating muskrat blind. Yet the idea is that it will imitate a muskrat hut.
Came up with the idea of putting a dome that would mimic a muskrat hut over a float tube, and that way you could rather inconspicuously float amongst the waterfowl. Well, you know, sometimes it actually is worse than not having one, and this might be one of those occasions. On some ponds I've gone in where waterfowl was fairly acclimated to people as they are here, and float around in a tube and they ignore you because they think you're a fisherman. And you put the blind on and they act like something from Mars has just landed and the whole lake empties with us screaming and honking and splashing and flapping.
So we may be disappointed here, but I want to work some ruddy ducks that live on this lake, and when they first come up in the spring, they're a little bit shy yet. Right here. Ha! You'll never see me coming. Quack, 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 quack. I figure if you look like a duck and you feel like a duck, you might as well talk like a duck. Quack, quack. Oh, look, someone left a camera on the dock. I could use one of those. Stealth photographer. Patience and persistence, you have to keep at it. You've got to be patient until the lighting is right and your subjects are right. You have to be persistent in pursuing that. And then you have to have either a natural eye or a developed eye for composition and beauty. It is quite often you'll find something half hidden in the cattails, preening, sitting on a log or something, and if you just go blundering by, you'll miss your opportunity. So I check things out carefully before I go, and then I turn around and put the old flippers into action and head for the backwaters. A lot of people think when they go to photograph wildlife, they're photographing animals or birds or snakes or whatever the subject matter is, and I tell students in my workshops, you don't photograph things, you photograph light. It's reflected light. And you can have the world's largest deer or elk, for instance, in your viewfinder. And if you've got ugly light, you're going to have an ugly picture, no matter how big it is. You might have a record. There's this elk, the biggest one anyone's ever photographed, but it's not going to necessarily be a beautiful picture. It's light that makes the image, reflected light. I've got a wood duck I photographed on a pond that was reflecting autumn colors. And the pond is orange and bronze and yellow and red, and it's just gorgeous, the color in it. And of course, the wood duck is so colorful. And the two together seem to work really well. And that shot has done fairly well for me. I've had a couple of magazine covers with it and a calendar cover and a number of things. All right. There's probably about 10 to a dozen ruddies, one scaup and one bufflehead. Both drakes. It starts off as fun. It's like hunting or fishing. You want to be outdoors. You want to be with wildlife. You want to sneak up on it. You want to see it in its secret world, doing things that you don't normally see. And it's thrilling. It's exciting. It's all the reasons that most people get involved in wildlife in one form or another. But once you decide to start making money at it and turn it into a business, you have to treat it as a business. And the upshot is you spend more time in the office, going over slides over a light table, filing slides, going to the computer, finding markets, convincing people to use your stuff, sending out submissions, logging submissions in again. I spend more time in the office than I do outdoors. You know, I started off spending more time out photographing, but once you get a collection, several tens of thousands of slides in the file, it's time to start selling them. You can take more and more and more, and you just really can't make a living that way unless you get them out there for buyers to see. Coming in for a landing. Oh, it also helps to be a masochist in this business. You must love to suffer cold, heat, mosquitoes, dampness, dryness, excruciating muscle pain, excruciating. I thought I'd be out fishing and hunting and writing stories about that, but I never imagined I'd be in Idaho, for one thing. I always dreamed about getting to the Rocky Mountains and seeing all those wonderful things I'd read about. Can't explain it, just a natural interest. It's like, I think of Aldo Leopold's old line about you can do without golf, but who could live without goose music? It's just something inside of me. It makes me that interested. I've been like that ever since I was a kid. Just had a fascination for it. I think that's the way it is with most people who are interested in wildlife. You're either naturally attracted to it and you find it fascinating, or who cares? Favorite subject matter? Gosh, I don't know, that's a tough one. I'd probably have to go with birds. I've always been fascinated with birds, even though I'm a hunter and I love mammals, big game animals. I don't know, day in and day out, the color, I think, of birds and the fact that they're awake and diurnal. You don't have to be sneaking around at the edge of night hoping to have enough light to get a picture of them. They're out all day and they're colorful and they're mating rituals and antics and dances, and they're just such a variety with birds. You need to know when they're moving, times of day, seasons. For instance, the red-winged blackbirds right now, in maybe 3 weeks now, they'll start nesting and they're real territorial, and you can paddle within 10 feet of them and they will remain on their territory. They might complain about you being there, and then when you get too close, you know it's time to back off. But usually if we're in, say 10 to 20 feet of a bird the size of a red-winged blackbird with a large lens, you can get a pretty good image. Oh yeah, of course there are always ethics when you're outdoors. The photographer ideally should be invisible to his subject. It rarely happens. Wildlife is just too sharp for that. They hear you, they smell you, they see you, they know you're there. But wild animals also have a knack for knowing when something is dangerous and when it isn't. They have a flight distance. And if you know their behavior and watch them closely, you can detect when they're becoming nervous and when you're disrupting them and need to back off. Study their times and their patterns and then set up a blind. Sometimes it might take 2 weeks of moving a blind slowly closer to position to get everything just right. It's a long and it would be tedious, except for there's so many interesting things going on all the time. It's rarely tedious. Occasionally boring while you wait. Sometimes you may sit in a blind for 8 hours at a crack. But once the wildlife shows up, things start to happen.
Rollin', 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 keep them doggies rollin' rawhide. Through wind and rain and weather, hell bent for leather, wishing this goose was by my side. All the film I'm wasting, good victuals I should be tasting, if I just stayed home and had breakfast. Hit 'em up, move 'em out, raw film. Shoot 'em out, blast 'em out, crank 'em out, click 'em out. Waste all that raw film.
I think that it's absolutely critical that you maintain places like Gray's Lake for wildlife.
In 1906, President Teddy Roosevelt, an avid hunter and naturalist, signed into law an executive order to establish the National Wildlife Refuge System. With the stroke of a pen, he set into motion the world's largest network of lands set aside for the benefit of wildlife. In our next story, we'll introduce you to Gray's Lake, a national wildlife refuge in eastern Idaho that's truly a waterfowl wonderland.
Gray's Lake is a real jewel and a unique piece of habitat that needs to be protected. It is so productive and so unique in terms of its size. It has tremendous potential to produce wildlife, and that in and of itself is a real good reason for protecting it and giving it special attention.
This huge marshland has been protected as a national wildlife refuge since 1965. It's part of a system of over 400 refuges nationwide, 6 of which you'll find right here in Idaho.
I think we'll find a lot here at Gray's Lake. It's certainly an area where you aren't overrun with people, you don't have a lot of problems with crowds, you can be by yourself. You have to face some tough weather such as we're dealing with today.
The weather is typical for a high mountain valley that is typically unpredictable. Nestled in the Caribou Range of the Northern Rockies, Gray's Lake sits at an elevation of 6,400 feet. This means long winters and sluggish springs. Today, the marsh is veiled in a slow-moving mass of dark gray clouds that produces gentle, intermittent rains. The rain has no effect on the primary residents of Gray's Lake. From ducks and geese to stately shorebirds, the marsh is alive with waterfowl. Almost 200 different species of birds can be found in the refuge at one time or another. This colorful character is called an eared grebe, named for the golden tufts fanning out behind the eye. This distinctive plumage only appears during the spring breeding season. Nearby, a white-faced ibis uses its long, curved bill to probe for crustaceans, insects, and small fish, making its way delicately through the rushes. A spat breaks out between two male coots over the favors of a nearby female. Eventually, the challenger is driven off in a flurry of feathers. Cruising high above it all is a northern harrier, sometimes called a marsh hawk, searching for prey. A pair of Canada geese flies off, honking boisterously and disturbing the stillness of the marsh. In the tall grasses, a small blackbird perches confidently on a slender stalk that seems too delicate to bear even the minuscule weight of the bird. A mix of trumpeter swans and sandhill cranes share the shoreline. The trumpeters are fighting their way back from near extinction. These swans are probably the offspring of nesting pairs transplanted to the marsh in 1989 and 90. But the cranes are a common sight here. In fact, Gray's Lake holds the distinction of hosting the world's largest nesting concentration of greater sandhill cranes. The cranes are large birds, long-legged and long-necked, with a wingspan stretching to 7 feet. They have a distinctive call that can be heard over a mile away. Spring is a mating season, and for a moment, it looks as though we may be treated to a lively display of the courtship dance. But before it even gets going, the cranes seem to lose interest and drift away. Eventually, they will mate and lay up to 2 eggs on flat nests like this, bringing off a brood that will follow them like small shadows throughout the summer. Finally, in the fall, they'll migrate south to their wintering grounds in New Mexico. But next spring, they'll return to the promise of Gray's Lake, a living testimony to the idea of preservation initiated by President Teddy Roosevelt when he created the National Wildlife Refuge System.
I think that it's absolutely critical that you maintain places like Gray's Lake for wildlife, and that wildlife has something that is done strictly for it. And from that, we both protect that wildlife resource and we learn so much more. And we will learn even more in the future by that approach, I believe.
Because as more and more people use it, there's going to be more impact. And to use it wisely is important so that it's left for others to enjoy too.
Most of us have hiked along some sort of nature trail or interpretive path, but have you ever heard of traveling a nature trail made up of water? Well, this summer, we took a wildlife watching trip by kayak through the beautiful Big Lake country of North Idaho. If Idaho's panhandle could be defined by one element, it would be water. its sparkling lakes shimmer as the sun dances across the waves. Mountains mark the shorelines, softening from green to a hazy blue in the distance. Lake Pend Oreille, the largest of the North Idaho lakes, serves as the journey's end for wide, lazy rivers like the Clark Fork. Typical of most slow-moving rivers, the mouth of the Clark Fork spreads gracefully into a broad delta, wandering into secret passages and forming sluggish backwaters that are hidden from view behind tall reeds. These secluded areas form a natural shelter for wildlife, and what better way to view them than gliding silently by in a canoe or kayak.
So this shows an aerial shot of the Clark Fork Delta area. And the current will help us drift into this area. We'll take this narrow channel, which is a real good wildlife area back in through here.
Beth Paragamian heads up the Watchable Wildlife Program in Idaho's Panhandle. Her job, funded by the Idaho Department of Fish and Game, the United States Forest Service, and the Bureau of Land Management, is to help educate the public on the wonderful rewards of responsible wildlife viewing.
We are going to be traveling through a proposed kayak trail, and there's a lot of wildlife out in this area, and we ask that you be respectful, maintain a distance, and enjoy it.
Josie Merrithew has her own kayak adventures business called Full Spectrum Tours. She has joined Beth in an exciting cooperative effort between public agencies and a private business to design a wildlife viewing water trail through the meandering streams that make up the Clark Fork Delta.
Well, the scenery is really beautiful all along the Clark Fork Delta, and we have a lot of wetlands along the trail. There's different kinds of habitat ranging from cattails to cottonwoods, reeds. We'll see a variety of birds on our trip. If we're lucky, we'll get to see some mammals.
A side trip into a small cove provides our first look at some of the wildlife the area has to offer. The kayakers reach for their binoculars to view an osprey nest built high in a tall tree. Inside the rough assortment of sticks and mud, a young bird peeks over the edge, perhaps marveling at the colorful collection of boats drifting silently below.
When using a kayak or canoe, you have much more opportunity to see birds and wildlife because they're so quiet as they glide through the water. You don't disturb the wildlife, and you're able to see the animals in their natural habitat as they carry on their activities of feeding and raising young.
The group quietly leaves the cove and slides out into the main channel. Although most of the guests are first-time paddlers, they seem to have quickly mastered the skills required to maneuver the kayaks with ease.
And we've had children on trips as young as 4 and adults all the way up to 70. And the first reaction I get is, I can do this. This isn't so hard. I think people have a misconception about kayaking in general, is that it's something that they can't do, and what they find, especially with the open deck boats, that it's really quite simple.
The leisurely pace, combined with bright sunshine and beautiful scenery, instills a sense of quiet peace and contentment, something that can often go missing in the frantic rhythm that dictates our lifestyles today.
Well, it's really important. There are more and more people using the outdoors for relaxation and recreation, and people are getting farther away from nature in their daily lives. So as they go out for relaxation on weekends, they seek out places like this that are natural, have a lot of wildlife, have a lot of plants and trees around. It's relaxing.
The satisfaction for me is sharing something that I love, with the hope that by getting more people in touch with their environment and the other species that inhabit this environment, that maybe there'll be some protection in the future, and that's something that is very important to me.
Oh yes, a great personal satisfaction to see people enjoying the outdoors and to see wildlife and habitat left for others to enjoy too. Because as more and more people use it, there's going to be more impact, and to use it wisely is important so that it's left for others to enjoy too.
At the end of each program, we've established a tradition of showing a video essay of wildlife or scenery. We'll continue that tradition tonight as we close our show with memories of the best of 1995.